Rich students attack a black girl, not knowing her father is the new chief of the town. Welcome back to Meaningful Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and start the story right now. The lunchroom at West Ridge Middle School wasn't just a room, it was a battlefield cloaked in fluorescent light. A simmering cauldron of whispered alliances and unspoken betrayals. No fists flew here, no trays of mashed potatoes soared through the air. This was a quieter war. One waged with sidelong glances sharp as knives and words that cut deeper than any blade. At the far end of this treacherous arena sat 13-year-old Eva Sinclair. A lone figure hunched over a flimsy peanut butter sandwich, its edges crumbling like her resolve. She picked at it with trembling fingers, her dark eyes flickering toward the hum of voices 2 tables away, whispers slithering through the air like venomous snakes. "Why does she always sit alone?" someone hissed, their tone dripping with mock pity. "Maybe she doesn't have any friends." The words coiled around her, tightening like a noose, but Eva kept her head down, her jaw clenched. She'd heard it all before, this wasn't new. It was the soundtrack to her survival. Eva wasn't just another kid in the crowd. She was a shadow among the sea of pale faces. One of the few black students at West Ridge. A fact that painted a target on her back from the day she arrived. Blending in? That was a fantasy she'd abandoned long ago. Instead, she'd mastered the art of vanishing, slipping through the hallways like a ghost. Her footsteps silent, her presence a flicker easily ignored. It was safer that way. A fragile shield against the storm she knew was always brewing. But invisibility came at a cost. And she paid it every day in the weight of their stares. The sting of their silence. Then there was Connor Tate. He didn't just walk into a room, he claimed it. Strutting through the school like a king anointed in arrogance. His every step a thunderclap that demanded attention. Son of a local businessman with deep pockets and deeper influence. Connor was untouchable. A golden boy with a grin that could charm teachers and a reputation polished to a sickening shine. Parents fawned over him, inviting him to pool parties where he'd flash that easy smile. The one that got him out of detentions and into everyone's good graces. He was the kid who could do no wrong, until you saw the glint in his eye. The predator's gleam that marked his prey. And for the past month, that prey was Eva. It started small, insidious, a shove that sent her books crashing to the floor in a chaotic avalanche. A clumsy bump in the hallway that left her stumbling into lockers. Her shoulder throbbing. Kids being kids, the teachers would say with a shrug. Their smiles as hollow as their excuses. But Connor didn't stop there. He'd chosen her, locked onto her like a hunter scenting blood. And now every day was a game of how far he could push before she broke. Today, it was her lunch. She'd barely lifted the sandwich to her lips when a hand, quick, cruel, snatched the paper bag from the table. Her head snapped up, and there he was, Connor, towering over her, his grin a jagged slash of triumph. "What you got, Sinclair?" he sneered, ripping the bag open with theatrical flair, pulling out her sandwich as if it were evidence of some grand crime. "Peanut butter? Seriously?" He held it up, dangling it like a trophy for his audience, the table of loyal lackeys behind him. Their laughter erupting like gunfire. "Guess your dad's new job doesn't pay enough for real food." The words hit her like a slap. Hot and humiliating, but Eva stayed silent, her fingers curling into fists beneath the table, nails biting into her palms. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Not yet. Connor leaned closer, his breath a sour gust against her face. You should really say thank you. I'm just trying to help you diet." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the sandwich over his shoulder. It sailed through the air, a pitiful arc, before landing with a wet splat on the grimy tile, a casualty in his little war. Eva's stomach lurched, a sick twist of hunger and rage. But she wouldn't cry. Not here, not with their eyes boring into her, waiting for the tears they craved. She reached down, desperate to salvage what was left. But Connor's foot came down fast, crunch, smashing the bread into a mangled smear beneath his sneaker. "Oops," he said, his smirk a blade twisting in her gut. For a heartbeat, the world shrank to a pinpoint, just Eva, the ruined sandwich, and the cackling chorus ringing in her ears. Their laughter was a tidal wave, crashing over her, drowning her in shame. She could feel it, the weight of their anticipation, the thrill of her defeat. But she wouldn't break. Not today. Grabbing her backpack, She stood, her movements sharp and deliberate, shoving past the tables, past the snickers and whispers that trailed her like shadows. She didn't stop, through the cafeteria doors, past the lockers, all the way to the girls' bathroom. The stall door slammed shut behind her, the lock clicking into place with a finality that echoed in the silence. She sank onto the closed toilet lid, her breath ragged, her chest tight. This was her sanctuary, her hiding place. She'd wait here, counting the seconds until the lunch bell screamed, then slip out and pretend it never happened. Because telling someone? That never worked. Teachers would cluck their tongues and say, "Ignore him." The principal would call it a misunderstanding. And tomorrow, Connor would be back, his grin sharper, his aim truer. But what Eva didn't know, what she couldn't see through the haze of her humiliation, was that the storm was shifting. Tomorrow wouldn't be just another day. Tomorrow, something inside her would snap. Tomorrow, she'd fight back. And tomorrow, Connor Tate would cross a line he couldn't uncross. The air in West Ridge Middle School crackled with an unspoken menace. A storm brewing beneath the humdrum chatter of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking on polished floors. Eva Sinclair moved through it all like a hunted thing, her every step a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. She'd survived Connor Tate's petty jabs, the books flung from her desk in a cascade of chaos, the accidental shoves that sent her crashing into cold metal lockers, but survival wasn't peace. It was a temporary truce. A fleeting gasp before the next blow landed. And Connor? He wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. He'd tasted her silence, savored her refusal to scream. And now he hungered for more humiliation, more power, more of her crumbling under his heel. It started before first period. A Monday morning cloaked in deceptive calm. Eva stood at her locker, her fingers fumbling with the combination, when a force, sudden, brutal, slammed into her back. The breath punched out of her lungs as she lurched forward, her forehead grazing the jagged edge of the locker door, a hair's breadth from splitting skin. Laughter erupted behind her, a jagged, feral sound that clawed at her ears. She turned, slow as a cornered animal. And there he was, Connor, leaning against the lockers like a king surveying his conquest, his smirk a crescent moon of malice. "My bad, Sinclair," he drawled, his voice slick with fake innocence. "Didn't see you there." Her fists clenched at her sides, nails carving half-moons into her palms. But she swallowed the fire roaring in her throat. That's what he wanted, a spark to fan into flames. She wouldn't give it to him. Not yet. But Connor wasn't a boy who settled for quiet victories. By lunchtime, his game had twisted into something darker, a venomous thread weaving through the cafeteria's restless buzz. Eva stepped into the room, her tray trembling slightly in her hands, and felt the shift, like a predator's eyes locking onto her from the shadows. Whispers slithered through the crowd, fast and poisonous. "Did you hear?" She tried to fight Connor. "No way." "Huh? Yeah." Swung on him and everything. "Bet," she cried after. Her feet froze mid-step, the air turning thick and suffocating. She hadn't fought him, not yet, but the lie spread like wildfire, each word a spark igniting the dry tinder of her fragile reputation. She glanced toward Connor's table, where he lounged like a prince on a throne, scrolling his phone with a grin that sliced through her. He didn't need to look up. He knew she'd hear. He knew she'd feel it, the isolation tightening like a cage. The rumor wasn't just words, it was a weapon. Sharper than any shove, deadlier than any stolen lunch. It painted her as the aggressor, the unhinged outcast, ensuring no one would dare sit with her, talk to her, see her as anything but a pariah. And it worked. She sat alone that day. The next, and the next. Her tray a barren island in a sea of averted eyes. By Friday, a flicker of hope dared to bloom. Maybe he'd tired of her. Maybe the game had lost its thrill. She was wrong. The final bell rang, a shrill cry of freedom. And Eva hurried toward the front doors, her backpack bouncing against her spine, her heart lighter with the promise of escape. She was halfway across the parking lot, the late afternoon sun glinting off asphalt, when his voice sliced through the air like a whip. "Hey, Sinclair." She kept walking, her pulse hammering, willing the distance to swallow her whole. "Where you going?" he called. Closer now, his tone mocking, syrupy. "Thought we were friends." Her fingers tightened around her backpack straps, the pavement stretching endlessly before her. Too exposed, too vulnerable. Then, a jolt. A hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her back with a force that spun her around. She tore free, stumbling, and faced him, Connor. His grin a bared fang. His eyes alight with cruel delight. "Don't touch me," she spat, the words bursting out before she could cage them. His friends howled behind him. A pack of hyenas circling their prey. But Connor just tilted his head. Unfazed. "Relax," he said, stepping closer, his voice a low taunt. "I just wanted to say hi." Her blood roared in her ears. A tempest begging to break. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice steady despite the quake in her chest. He leaned in, his breath hot and invasive. "Or what? You gonna tell on me?" He flicked her backpack strap. A casual flick that felt like a declaration of war. "You're just mad 'cause nobody cares." Something snapped. A thread stretched too thin. A dam buckling under pressure. Before she knew it, her hands shot out, slamming into his chest with all the fury she'd buried for weeks. Connor stumbled back, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, his smirk vanishing for one glorious, stunned second. His friends fell silent, the air electric with shock. It should have ended there, a fleeting triumph. A crack in his armor. But Connor Tate wasn't used to losing. His eyes narrowed, a storm cloud rolling in. And in that moment, Eva saw it. The promise of retaliation. Cold and unyielding, he straightened, brushing off his shirt like her touch was filth. And the grin crept back, slower, darker, a vow etched in every line. She dared to push back, to strip him of his crown in front of his court. And now he'd make her pay. As she turned and fled, her heart pounding a war drum in her chest. She didn't know how far he'd go, but she'd lit the fuse. And the explosion was coming. The weekend should have been a reprieve. A fragile bubble of quiet where Eva Sinclair could lick her wounds and brace for the next onslaught. But Monday morning shattered that illusion like glass under a hammer. The halls of West Ridge Middle School buzzed with a new, sinister energy, a current of malice crackling beneath the surface. Unseen but inescapable, Eva felt it the moment she stepped inside. A prickle on her skin like the air before a lightning strike. She'd shoved Connor Tate in the parking lot, stripped him of his smug invincibility for one fleeting moment. And now the beast was awake. Its claws unsheathed. She dared to fight back. And he'd vowed retribution. She just didn't know how vicious it would be. It began with the stares, furtive glances that lingered too long. Heads snapping away when she turned to meet them. By third period, the whispers had morphed into something sharper. A chorus of muffled snickers slicing through the hum of English class. Students tilted their phones toward her, screens glowing with secrets she couldn't yet see, their fingers tapping out a rhythm of mockery. Some pointed, bold and brazen. Others hid their laughter behind cupped hands, their eyes glinting with glee. Eva's stomach churned, a cold knot tightening as she slid into her desk. Her gaze locked on the scarred wood, willing the world to shrink. Then came the voice, syrupy and venomous. From behind her, "Nice photos." Sinclair. Her head whipped up. Lena Carmichael, Connor's sharp-tongued shadow, lounged in her seat, smirking like a cat with a mouse pinned under its paw. She tapped her phone with a manicured nail, the screen a glowing guillotine. Eva's hands shook as she fumbled for her own phone, buried in the depths of her backpack. The moment she unlocked it, a flood of notifications crashed over her, a tidal wave of digital poison. Her breath snagged in her throat. There it was. A photo of her from the parking lot. Her face frozen mid-shove, but twisted beyond recognition. Someone, Connor, no doubt, had warped it. Her features stretched into a grotesque snarl. Her eyes wild with rage she'd never felt. Across the top, in bold red letters like blood splashed on a wall, screamed the words, "Psycho Sinclair can't control herself." Her fingers trembled, the phone slipping in her sweat-slick grip. Comments scrolled beneath the image, each one a dagger plunged deeper. "Wow. She looks unhinged. No wonder she has no friends." Connor should have hit her back. "I heard she tried to scratch his face." Lies piled on lies. A grotesque tapestry woven from a single moment of defiance. Eva's throat closed, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She wouldn't cry, not here. Not with their eyes feasting on her ruin, but the humiliation burned like acid, searing through her veins. Lena leaned forward, her voice a mocking purr. "Connor says you have a temper problem. Maybe you should get some help." The words dripped with false sweetness. A poison apple offered with a smile. Eva stared straight ahead, her nails gouging crescents into her palms, anchoring her to the edge of composure. By lunchtime, the photo had metastasized, spreading through the school like a plague. Every table buzzed with it. Every glance carried its weight. She sat alone, her tray untouched. The cafeteria a coliseum where she was the wounded gladiator. Surrounded by a jeering crowd. By the final bell, it was all anyone could talk about, a wildfire of whispers and pointed fingers that chased her out the doors. She fled home, her backpack a dead weight on her shoulders. Her mind a storm of shame and fury. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the cracks of the world and never resurface. But when she pushed through the front door, the air shifted, thick with a quiet that wasn't peace, but prelude. Her father stood there, a towering figure in the dim light of the living room, his phone clutched in one steady hand. "Eva," he said, his voice a low rumble. Too calm, too controlled. "Sit down." Her stomach plummeted as she sank onto the couch, the cushion swallowing her like quicksand. He turned the phone toward her. And there it was again, Psycho Sinclair, glaring back in cruel red letters. His face was a mask, unreadable, but his eyes burned with something fierce and unyielding. "You want to explain this to me?" he asked. Each word a stone dropped into still water, rippling with intent. Her heart thundered, a trapped bird battering its cage. I didn't do anything," she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of truth. He studied her, his gaze piercing through her defenses. "I know," he said, his tone darkening, a storm cloud rolling in. "I also know exactly who did." A lump clawed up her throat. "Dad, please," she started, but he wasn't listening. He was already moving, his thumb jabbing at the phone, dialing a number with the precision of a man loading a gun. The silence that followed was suffocating, a coiled spring ready to snap. Eva sat frozen, her breath shallow. As the realization crashed over her, Connor had lit the match. But he'd just ignited a war he couldn't win. Her father wasn't just a man, he was the new police chief. A force of justice forged in fire. And in that moment, she knew. The boy who'd humiliated her had finally picked the wrong target. The reckoning was coming, swift and unstoppable. The living room was a pressure cooker, the air thick with a silence that hummed like a taut wire ready to snap. Eva Sinclair sat on the couch, her backpack still slung over her shoulders, its weight tethered to the chaos she'd fled. Her father, Chief Sinclair, stood like a monolith in the fading light, his phone a loaded weapon in his grip. He didn't shout, never did. When he was angry, he turned to stone, his voice a quiet blade that cut deeper than any roar. Now, that blade was unsheathed. "Principal Dawson," he said into the phone, his tone smooth as polished steel. "We need to talk. Now." Eva's stomach twisted into knots, her breath shallow as she watched him. Watched the man who'd dismantled gang empires and uprooted corruption take aim at her middle school nightmare. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was war. On the other end, Dawson's voice crackled through, a feeble shield of platitudes. "We'll look into it, kids being kids." Her father's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking like a countdown to detonation. "No," he cut in, his words a guillotine dropping. "We're not going to look into it. We're going to fix it. Today." The line went silent, the principal's excuses suffocating under the weight of that command. Eva's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She'd never seen him like this. A predator coiled and ready to strike. Within the hour, they were in his car, the engine growling as it devoured the road to West Ridge Middle. The school loomed in the evening dusk, its empty halls a hollow shell, its windows glinting like the eyes of a beast lying in wait. Principal Dawson stood by the front office, arms crossed, his forced smile a flimsy mask slipping under the chief's shadow. "Chief Sinclair," he began, his voice oily with unease. "I understand you have some concerns." Her father didn't waste breath on pleasantries. He stepped forward, his presence a wall of unyielding force, and thrust his phone out like a drawn sword. "Connor Tate has been harassing my daughter for over a month," he said, each syllable a hammer strike. "And now he's spreading lies about her online. This," he jabbed at the screen, Psycho Sinclair glaring in crimson accusation, "is what I want gone." Dawson shifted, his discomfort a bead of sweat glistening on his brow. "Now, Chief, let's not blow this out of proportion. I spoke with Connor's parents. And they assured me. I don't care what his parents assured you. Her father snapped, his voice low and lethal. A storm breaking over a fragile shore. I care about what he did. Dawson faltered, his hands fluttering like trapped birds. We don't want to punish a student for. The chief took a step closer, his eyes narrowing to slits of cold fire. Do you know what my job is, Dawson? He asked, his tone a whisper that roared with menace. I enforce the law. And last I checked, cyber harassment and targeted bullying aren't just schoolyard games, they're crimes. But you know what's worse? He paused, letting the silence choke the room. A school that turns a blind eye. The color drained from Dawson's face, his authority crumbling like ash in the wind. Before he could stammer a reply, the office door swung open with a creak that echoed like a gunshot. Connor Tate strode in, flanked by his parents, Richard Tate, a broad-shouldered titan in a tailored suit, radiating the arrogance of wealth, and his wife, a wiry figure with a smile as brittle as cracked glass. Connor's smirk had faded, but his chin stayed high, a prince expecting his throne. Chief Sinclair, Richard boomed, his voice smooth as oil over steel. I don't see why this had to become a spectacle. Her father didn't blink. Your son made it one, he said, his words a cold blade slicing through the pretense. Mrs. Tate let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Come on, they're just kids. They push. They roughhouse. This is all so unnecessary. Eva's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms. Unnecessary? The word ignited a spark of fury in her chest. But her father's response was ice to her fire. If my daughter had done to your son what he did to her, he said, his voice a slow, deliberate drawl, would we be standing here? Or would you already have a lawyer tearing this place apart? Richard's jaw twitched, a crack in his polished facade. Now, let's not make this about, it is about something. Her father interrupted, stepping into their space, his presence a tidal wave. It's about power. It's about what you let your son get away with. And it ends here. Connor shifted, his bravado wilting under the chief's gaze, his eyes darting to his parents for rescue. Her father turned to Dawson, his voice a command carved in stone. What's the school's official response? The principal hesitated, glancing at the Tates like a man caught in a crossfire. Then cleared his throat. Connor will be suspended, effective immediately. The room froze, the air turning brittle. Mrs. Tate gasped, a shrill cry of disbelief. Suspended? For what? A stupid joke. Richard's face darkened, his voice a growl. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? Her father met his stare, unflinching, a mountain against a gale. Do you know who I am? The question hung like a thunderclap, the room shrinking under its weight. Richard's mouth pressed into a thin, furious line. This isn't over. He spat, his threat a hollow echo. Her father's lips curved, a ghost of a smile that promised ruin. You're right, he said. It's not. Connor swallowed hard, his swagger gone, replaced by a flicker of fear, raw and unfamiliar. For the first time, the golden boy looked small, a shadow dwarfed by the storm he'd unleashed. Eva watched, her breath caught in her throat. As the tide turned, Connor had crossed the wrong line, and now the chief's justice was a blade poised to fall. The echoes of Connor Tate's downfall rippled through West Ridge Middle School like shockwaves after an explosion, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Tuesday morning dawned, and his absence hung heavy, a throne abandoned, a king dethroned. Wednesday stretched into Thursday, and still no sign of him. His usual swagger replaced by an eerie void. Whispers swirled through the halls like wildfire smoke, each rumor a spark igniting the next. I heard his dad stormed the school board, demanding they reverse the suspension. Nah, his mom's been screaming at the district to scrub it from his record. They're pulling him out, private school. Some fancy place far away. Eva Sinclair moved through the chaos like a specter, her head low, her steps deliberate, dodging the glances that trailed her, some curious, some odd, none daring to meet her eyes. The air had shifted, charged with a new electricity, and she felt it humming beneath her skin. By Monday, the digital dagger, Psycho Sinclair, had vanished, erased from every screen as if it had never existed. Principal Dawson's voice crackled over the intercom that morning, a trembling sermon on online harassment and the school's zero-tolerance policy. The words rang hollow once, a flimsy shield for a system that had failed her, but now they carried weight. forged in the fire of her father's wrath. The hallways softened, the snickers fading into a cautious hush. Students who'd once turned away now offered nods, silent salutes. Fleeting but sharp, like glints of steel in the sun. Eva felt their stares differently now. Not as chains dragging her down, but as threads weaving something new, respect. Hard-won and fragile, a crown she hadn't sought but couldn't refuse. Yet the cafeteria remained her crucible. She sat alone, as always, her tray a barren battlefield, her fingers tracing the edges of her food as if testing the ground beneath her feet. The clatter of voices buzzed around her. A storm held at bay, until a shadow fell across her table. She looked up, her breath catching like a snagged thread. Lena Carmichael slid into the seat opposite, her usual venom replaced by a nervous twitch, her fork scraping aimlessly at her plate. "So," Lena started, her voice a tight wire, eyes skittering away from Eva's. "Guess you, got the last laugh." "Huh?" Eva's grip tightened on her fork, the metal cool against her palm. She didn't answer, letting the silence stretch, a weapon of its own. Lena cleared her throat, a brittle sound. "Look, I wasn't really trying to be a part of all that. Eva's fork clinked against the tray, a sharp note cutting through the excuse. "You just laughed," she said, her voice low, steady, a blade unsheathed. Lena flinched, her bravado crumbling like dry earth. Eva didn't wait for more. She stood, tray in hand, and turned away, leaving Lena stranded in her guilt. The other girl's words chased her, faint and desperate. "He had it coming. You know." Eva paused, glancing back. For the first time, Lena met her gaze, no smirk, no shield, just a raw flicker of something real, remorse. Eva didn't respond. She didn't need to. Today, she wasn't the one running. Today, she walked away because she could. The next evening, the kitchen glowed with the warm hum of normalcy, a stark contrast to the war she'd fought. Her father poured coffee, the dark stream curling into his mug like ink spilling over a page. "How's school?" he asked, his tone casual, as if he hadn't just toppled an empire for her. Eva shrugged, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Better." He raised an eyebrow, a silent prod. "Well," she added, "better than it was last week." A ghost of a smile flickered across his face, a rare crack in his granite facade. "That's good," he said, taking a slow sip, then setting the mug down with a deliberate thud. "You know I'm proud of you." She blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "I didn't do anything." He leaned back, his eyes locking onto hers, steady and piercing. "You stood up for yourself." Her breath hitched, a protest rising. "I shouldn't have had to." His expression softened, a shadow of regret passing over him. "No," he agreed, "you shouldn't have." She exhaled, staring at the wood grain of the table, its lines a map of battles past. "What happens to Connor?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Her father studied her, weighing his words. "That's up to him," he said finally. She frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice a low rumble of truth. "Actions have consequences. He's learning that now. Whether he changes or not, that's on him." The words settled over her like a mantle, heavy but warm. For so long, Connor had been untouchable, a prince clad in privilege. His name a shield, his friends a fortress. But he'd misjudged her, misjudged the storm he'd provoked. Eva wasn't afraid of him anymore. As she walked into school the next day, the halls felt different, or maybe she did. Her shoulders squared, her gaze steady. She moved through the crowd not as a shadow, but as a force. Connor Tate was gone, whisked away to some private academy or distant boarding school. The rumors said, but his absence wasn't her victory. Her triumph was in the steps she took, the space she claimed, the fear she'd shed like a skin too small. She'd fought, not just him, but the silence that had caged her. And she'd won. The dust of Connor Tate's exile settled over West Ridge Middle School like ash after a volcanic eruption, leaving the air raw and restless. By week's end, he was a ghost, whisked away to some gilded private academy or a far-off boarding school. Depending on which rumor you believed, his absence carved a jagged hole in the school's hierarchy. A throne toppled, its king vanquished. Eva Sinclair felt the shift in her bones as she walked the halls. No longer a shadow slinking through the cracks but a figure emerging from the wreckage. The stares lingered, some still hushed, some tinged with unease, but they no longer pinned her down. The damage Connor had wrought, the months of venom and isolation, didn't vanish with his departure. It lingered like a scar, a reminder etched in whispers that halted when she passed. Yet Eva wasn't waiting for their forgiveness or their pity. She was done begging for a place at their table. Instead, she seized it. In class, her hand shot up, a defiant flag piercing the silence, her voice ringing out with answers she'd once swallowed. In the halls, her eyes met theirs, unflinching, a challenge wrapped in quiet steel, daring them to look away first. Slowly, the ice of her solitude cracked. On Friday, a girl from math class dropped into the seat beside her at lunch. Her "hey" casual but loaded. A bridge extended over a chasm. The next day, a group beckoned her into their project, their invitation a lifeline she hadn't expected. By Monday, a boy from English, a wiry kid who'd always hovered on the fringes, muttered as he passed her locker. What he did was messed up. She turned, startled. What? He adjusted his backpack, avoiding her gaze, just saying, if I'd known it was that bad. He stopped, shaking his head, but the words hung there, heavy with unspoken regret. It mattered, not because he'd acted, but because he'd seen. Silence had been the bully's ally, and now it was breaking. That night, the living room glowed with a fragile peace. The TV's low drone a backdrop to the rustle of her father's newspaper. Eva flipped through a book, its pages a shield against the day's weight, while Chief Sinclair sat across from her, a sentinel in repose. He folded the paper with a crisp snap, setting it aside. You know, he said, his voice a deep current cutting through the quiet. I had my own Connor Tate when I was your age. She glanced up, caught by the unexpected thread. Yeah? He nodded, his eyes drifting to a distant horizon only he could see. Didn't have social media back then. But the game was the same, power. Cruelty. Picking on someone to feel big. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. There's always someone who thinks they can get away with it. Her breath hitched. Did you do anything about it? He exhaled, slow and deliberate, a storm gathering in his pause. I didn't have a choice, he said finally. She frowned, leaning forward. What do you mean? His gaze locked onto hers, steady as granite, alive with fire. I had to decide. Let him carve out who I was, or take the chisel myself and shape it. His words landed like stones in a still pond, rippling through her. I'm sitting here, aren't I? He added, a faint smile tugging at his lips. A victor's quiet triumph. A laugh broke free from her, sharp and surprising, slicing through the tension. Yeah, she said, grinning despite herself. Guess you are. He reached over, his hand a warm anchor on her shoulder. And you are too. The truth sank deep, rooting itself in her core. For so long, Connor had held the reins, his privilege a whip, his cruelty a cage, defining her as the outcast, the prey, the girl who didn't belong. But she'd wrested them back. She'd spoken, fought, pushed against the tide until it broke. That night, as she lay in bed, the shadows on her ceiling danced like echoes of her victory, not his absence, but her presence, unshakable and fierce. Monday morning blazed with a new dawn. The halls thrummed with life. But Eva walked through them transformed, a warrior forged in fire. Her stride a drumbeat of defiance. Lena Carmichael offered a nod from across the corridor, not an apology, but a surrender, a crack in her armor. The boy from English held the door, a silent gesture heavier than words. At lunch, a girl from history slid into the seat across from her. You mind if I sit here? A spark of connection. Eva paused, then shrugged, her voice steady. Go for it. She didn't need their atonement, didn't crave their validation. She'd already won, not by banishing Connor, but by dismantling the power he'd wielded. The lesson burned bright. No one should have to claw their way to respect, to prove their right to exist unharassed. Yet the world demanded it. And Eva had answered, not with pleas, but with action. Bullies thrived in the dark, fed by the silence of those who looked away. But she'd lit a torch, refusing to let them define her. And in that blaze, their dominion crumbled. As she sat there, the cafeteria's clamor a distant roar. She knew, the next Connor Tate wouldn't win so easily. Not because she'd fought alone, but because her stand had cracked the silence wide open. And that was the real victory. A legacy forged in courage, echoing far beyond the walls of West Ridge. Thank you for accompanying us in today's story. See you again in the next videos. Hello and see you again.